Hello, everybody. So this is the state of AI, the state of the AI world for developers. My name is Brian Randell. So the state of AI world for developers. What we're going to do is talk about the AI landscape, and then we'll look at specific developer tools. We'll talk about building AI apps, and we'll look at ethical considerations. And in doing this, this is kind of that roadmap type of session. I will do a couple little demos, but it's more focusing on the world out there. And then we have other sessions this week. For example, tomorrow I'm giving one that's going to focus specifically on AI-enabled tools, which originally the title was just AI-enabled IDEs. But what we're really seeing is that AI is showing up everywhere inside various tools, from our command line to our text editors and then to our full-blown IDEs like Visual Studio 2026. So when we think about what's going on here, one of the fundamental issues is the explosive growth. Honestly, this is what I do in my day job, right? I am constantly looking at AI tools and technologies and trying to keep up. And that is part of my job. For the rest of you, you're probably thinking, yeah, I'm just added that on as an extra thing I now need to do, right? And so it is frustrating to think about what's happening. Probably to do the AI summary for this talk, right? One of the biggest things I'll tell you is that it's okay for you to slow down, right? You do not necessarily have to be on the latest and greatest thing that comes out via some announcement. For example, last week, a couple things happened. One is that on Thursday, Microsoft shipped the latest release of Visual Studio Code. It's got a bunch of new AI features in it, and I'll give you an example of that in a bit. On the other hand, also, OpenAI is like, oh, we got a new frontier model. We got ChatGPT 5.1 and friends. And what you'll see then by extension is Microsoft and GitHub are with it, and it's available right now if you want to have that in your Copilot coding experience. And so on one hand, you feel like, oh, I must jump on that. I must do that. Unfortunately, that's arguably part of the whole consumerism mindset that has been pushed on us over the last few decades, and that, oh, you got to buy the latest and greatest, clothes, car, etc. And therefore, you also have to do this when it comes to your AI. And that's not necessarily the case. What I would encourage you to consider is that going the appropriate speed for you and your organization is a critical mechanism to use to play the long game. Today is interesting that we have a problem with the internet. And the core problem, it seems, is that Cloudflare did something. Now, Cloudflare, if you don't know what they offer, is they offer infrastructure services to a lot of the big properties out there. For example, I was telling someone this, xAI, which is Elon Musk's company, they use it as a validation mechanism if you try and log in with your email address, as opposed to logging in with one of the well-known providers like Google, Microsoft, etc. And you'll actually see it. You'll type your email address, and then they'll do a Cloudflare validation that kind of looks at a few things that's going on. And for some of you, if you're in the more of the IT pro world, you know it's always DNS, right? So there's probably something to be said there. I think one of the headlines was Cloudflare took down London. That's good, I think there's a movie related to that, and it was pretty bad. Hopefully, they didn't really get rid of London, because I like London. There's some really good curry. But when we think about this, Cloudflare went down. Okay, well, let's rewind a few more weeks back. Anybody use Microsoft Azure by chance? Front Door. Yeah, Front Door kind of had a problem. And again, Front Door and Cloudflare both offer some similar services around proxying people coming into your web properties and actually accessing them. And so a reaction for some of those people, and then Amazon had an issue, right? It just feels like, they come in threes, right? Hopefully this is it. Google seems to still be working fine today. And so when you think about what's going on there, if you were overreactive to the issues with Amazon or Azure, you may have said, oh, well, maybe we should get Cloudflare instead. And now whoever did that in this very reactionary fashion is feeling pain and suffering, right? So I want you to take the same approach when it comes to AI. Now, I have developed a bad habit that luckily I was able to turn into a benefit to my business, and that is I doom scroll Reddit a bit. And for a long time, I used this great app for my iPhone called Apollo, right? The holy phone. And so that would be the thing I would do in line at the store, eating breakfast, those kind of things. And it was great because I could curate it. Well, when you curate what you're reading there, you kind of narrow your focus. So Reddit, they're kind of some jerks, and they did some stuff in the name of making money. Isn't that what it always is? And so what they did was they said, hey, we're not going to let Apollo play nice with us. We're going to charge a bunch of money. The developer said, forget it. I'm not going to do that. Yada, yada, yada. So now I'm using the real Reddit app. Not great, but it works. Now, in doing that, I said, well, let's just see what the main Reddit feed's like. And remember, right, when we look at the glorious internet, on one end, over here is puppies, unicorns, kittens, happy stuff. And over here's stuff that we shouldn't talk about in public, right? At all. And then kind of in the middle is kind of that neutral ground, right? Well, Reddit subscribes to that whole world. Well, luckily you can set the feed to where you don't want to see as much of the nasty, which is good. And I do have a point here. It's not, whether I look at car stuff or other things, it's AI. Well, they're watching you read Reddit. And so the fun thing is, as I started going through and looking at, oh, this is interesting. There's a subreddit that talks about Anthropic. There's one that talks about, GitHub. I knew that one. I worked at GitHub for a few years. And, no one on the internet knows you're a dog when you're using the internet. And I think humans who use the internet forget that they actually are human. They kind of turn into this mongrel that they have to come most of the time just to complain and scream and yell. And so if you're on there and looking at some of the AI-specific subreddits, and let's even narrow it down to those related to developers. On a daily basis, you will see people posting, I can't believe insert company shipped this product name that is a total negative term. That is the pattern. And I swear that actually they're using some other client I don't know about that says when you post to Reddit, do you want to do a puppies and unicorn post? Or do you want to do I'm a nasty mongrel post? And when you pick the mongrel one, it just says this is what you do. Name the company, name the product, and pick how derogatory you want to go. Every single day. The minute something new comes out, this model, I can't believe they did this. They ruined the model. And then, of course, you can't tell if it's human or the bots because it turns out that the puppy and unicorn stuff sounds like it's AI-generated slop. Because it's like, I think this product. I'm gonna make up a quote. Anthropic's Claude Haiku 4.5 is wonderful. It's changed my life. It's fast. It's efficient. And you're going, this feels a little astroturfy. It feels like someone from Anthropic's marketing got in there and did it. But I guarantee there will be 10 people that say, I can't believe they put this out. It's a total piece. I've used up all of my credits. I can't believe they're not giving me more for my money. I'm canceling today. And so if you take that and put that in your brain, what's my point there? The AI technology is changing so fast that for you to try and stay on the latest and greatest thing that comes out, you're actually going to cause yourself pain and suffering. Okay? So that's the summary for the talk. That's going a little more detail. The real stuff that's happening, though, if we go to the happy place, is that, yes, this democratized access means that anybody, through the power of the cloud, can build AI into their applications and technologies for pennies on the dollar. All of the major tools and technologies are available to you as developers and are then surfaced also through the top-level access points provided by what we tend to call the foundation models. So the foundation models are those top-level models offered by companies like Anthropic, OpenAI, etc. So in the case of OpenAI, the ChatGPT models. In the case of Anthropic, their Claude models. Now, as we look at what's happened, right, we've had this rapid evolution. A lot of you are my people. I can see similarities. I can see gray hair. I can see a developed body structure. People that maybe spend some time behind the keyboard as opposed to outside exercising, right? I'm all about those indoors. I think Jeff Atwood used to say he's an indoor sports enthusiast, right? His butt on the cushion with a controller in his hand. And so we've been around. But if you've been around, you realize that we've been progressing, but then it's just kind of like we've had these touchstone moments. We had the internet in the late 90s. In the aughts, it was the phone. In the 2010s, it was the cloud, and now it's AI. And the thing to look at that is we've seen some progression there, but what we've also seen now is that AI changes what we do definitely every week, if not every day. And so these are just some of these major touchstones. And you notice I have 2022 to 2024, ChatGPT and multi-model, right? That tipping point to where we can have it in our apps and we can actually do interesting things. And so when we think about it, right, we have these three major concepts, right? Number one, large language models. The number one thing to take away from this and to explain to your friends and family is that they are not sentient. If anything, they're sapient, right? The answers you get back from a large language model, particularly a frontier model that is offered by the major players, is just a game in statistics. It's probability thrown in with some adjustments so it doesn't sound inhuman. Okay? You may have heard things like the temperature setting, right? And so when we look at that, right, we're looking at not an evolution in intelligence, but an evolution in mathematics, right? And the fact that data storage is cheap and that computing power is going up, unfortunately, at a scary point to where it's using so much energy. So then we have this notion of diffusion models, which is I'm going to go in and be able to not only deal in this statistical probability experiment with words, but I'm also going to be able to do it with various types of multimedia, including images, video, and audio. And let's be honest, again, hang out and spend time on Reddit, it is scary what you're able to do both in the cloud, but also what you can do locally with an appropriate graphics card. To where you're able to create, and I'm not going to use the term deepfakes because that's something very specific, but I'm just going to say you're able to create synthetic individuals in videos that look real. To the point that we keep losing the ability to pick the tell. When OpenAI released DALL-E, and then, of course, other vendors followed with their various image generation things, one of the quick tells was, how many fingers does that person have? Ah, the six-fingered individual, right? Yeah, that was always a good one, right? Text was another tell, right? When you'd ask it to generate a thing and you'd have gibberish for the words instead of actual stuff. They're getting better. And then we have then this bringing it all together, what we call multimodal systems, where I can send a piece of data to a back-end system. It may be a frontier system like ChatGPT, like Anthropic, or it may be your own system. And based upon the question, you create an AI pipeline that analyzes the question and responds appropriately in the appropriate multimedia format. So these are all things that we're dealing with. And so when we start looking at the major players, right, here are just a few that really stand out. Now you'll notice I don't list Microsoft in there right now. And that's because Microsoft today is taking a more of an infrastructure approach, as well as we're not going to pick a particular LLM to call our own, right? Satya Nadella made a great play, invested appropriately in OpenAI, and therefore you can look at Microsoft as providing OpenAI first. But when you decide that you want to use some type of AI LLM technology in your application, and today that's through Azure AI Foundry, and yes, it's Ignite Week, by the way, and so, well, in about an hour we may have a new product name. I don't know. All right, but as of yesterday, Azure AI Foundry is where you can go in and set up your application and say, I want to use ChatGPT 4.5. I want to use, or sorry, 4.1. I want to use Grok, I want to use this, or I want to bring my own model where I've taken maybe one of the foundation models, maybe I've gone to Hugging Face, and I bring that on. And so these players and models are offering you choice. What is the problem of choice? It's the problem that some of us may have faced in the 80s. How many of you remember when there was a race for the best C++ compiler? Yes, finally, I'm not alone, right? That was a thing. Do we really think about it that much today? There's like kind of these major languages, but it's not like within the language there's 15 or 20 compilers to choose from. If you're going to do C#, there's one compiler. You do Java, well, there's kind of this weird dualism because of the fact that Oracle got involved, but at the end of the day, there's still really Java, right? There's the Go language. JavaScript, there's really only one JavaScript. There's all the frameworks. That's where it gets messy. And then there's TypeScript, but there's not a lot. But when we start thinking about this AI world, right, the number of models out there is crazy. We have the top level foundation, but then we have these more specialized models for doing stuff. If you want to really get lost in the technology space, go look at Hugging Face, right? If you're not familiar with Hugging Face is an open market for AI models. And so if we come over here and go to a browser, if you take a look here and look at their models, yes, folks, that is 2,263,990 models, right? I mean, it was easy, right? There's ChatGPT, there's Grok, there's Claude, right? It was like, there's, okay, two hands. 2 million? Okay, this is where it gets interesting, right? Depending upon the problem you're trying to solve, you may have to invest some time in this. And what I'm trying to say by showing this screen is, don't necessarily think that you only have to play with the big players. The additional benefit of looking at what's available on Hugging Face is these are much easier to self-host in your own environment than it might be to host one of the foundation models. And not all the foundation models, or excuse me, the frontier models are available for you to host on your own anyway. The folks from China with DeepSeek, when they came with their model, they made big waves of the fact that you can download the entire frontier model that they're offering and run it on your own hardware if you can get the hardware from NVIDIA, right? And folks, even your 5090 is not going to run the full thing, right? So when you start thinking about looking at the landscape, understand that the frontier models aren't your only choice. And Hugging Face is probably the location to go when you start looking at this. And you'll notice here, if we start looking at this top list here, text generation, okay, obviously very common. Image, text to text. Text generation, text to speech. Image to image. There's DeepSeek OCR, okay? As you start going down here, these models are providing you with those specialized functions that you may need. And where this brings us to the last point about the models and being able to use these different size ones over the frontier models is, number one, you can run them on devices like your supercomputer that you carry in your pocket. You can also use them at what we often refer to as the edge. Desktop experiences, IoT experiences, etc. All the way down to, yes, running models on your Raspberry Pi, your little device, to solve very specific problems, okay? There's a company called Unify. Anybody use Unify at home? Anybody got a hardware problem? Yeah, my people. I have more networking hardware than I ever imagined I'd have. I don't just have one thing. I have a 10 gigabit backbone in my house and a 25 gigabit server closet. I got problems, I admit it. The key there is, though, they have this technology, this hardware, that has intelligent software in it. They have this thing they call their control plane. And it's written by software nerds. You can tell they really have invested in it. It has a great UI, has a great experience. And they have been bringing AI to their technology. And in doing so, they have something called an AI key. This AI key is got some local models that it runs in a local chip. And what it does, among other things, it hooks into their security software. And so what it did is it upgraded my cameras. I had regular cameras on the outside of my house. They're hardwired. And it will do detection of things. It started simple with, there's motion. Something moved. Okay, great. Now we know it's a vehicle versus an entity. And now it does, it's a dog, it's a cat, it's an unrecognizable fork-legged thing. Oh, we have coyotes where I live. Lovely. Oh, that's a human. That's a child. Oh, that's Brian. That's Brian's wife. That's Brian's children. And so they're able to do that because they take a subset of what we consider to be AI and they put it on a chip, put it in a box, and it runs over my Ethernet. That's the world we're living in. And so don't get locked into this idea that you only have to use the major models. Okay. Okay. I kind of went through this: foundation models, fine-tuned models, and then application models. I kind of just discussed this slide, right? What Unify is doing is they have an application model. They basically have a security detection model that they have deployed onto an SoC, right? Silicon on a chip. What's happened here is we've seen this evolution in deep learning, right? Narrow AI into what we call the transformer revolution, right? The story behind ChatGPT is the Vishwani et al. Paper, Attention is All You Need, Generative Pre-trained Transformers. And then we started getting to this next level, which is scaling and multi-model integration, right? So scaling is the issue that in the perfect world, you have enough memory and processing power in one context to do the processing. The problem is these models at the frontier level are huge. And so the solution is, well, you get Jensen on stage from NVIDIA, and he wants to sell you a nice cluster of GPUs, okay? And through the magic of hyperscale, high-speed connections, they're able to take what is really multiple GPUs and multiple pieces of technology and create the illusion that it is one machine running it. And then you have what Azure does in the cloud, which is a request comes in, and they can actually parse it into chunks and feed it to multiple GPUs and come up with one answer, right, by breaking up the pipeline. And this is stuff that's way above my brain power and pay grade and definitely outside my cost budget, okay? But what, again, this is bringing us down to that point of mix and matching the pieces you need. And then the next level is what you see that was introduced first. I think the first people to really push it out was ChatGPT, but there was this back and forth with Anthropic. But this idea that the model will reason, and the system will reason, and the model will be able to tell you its thought process. This notion of understanding how the problem was solved. So if you remember when I said earlier is that the LM is just a bunch of statistical probabilities, right? It's basically figuring out the next token in the sequence to reply. The token is a part of a word, and over time that ends up being the answer you're looking for. And of course, this is manifested in most of the user experiences in that we have some chat interface where we can come in here and ask a question. Okay, well, there is this thing called a llama that looks like a llama, but it's Ollama. Anyway, this is an open source engine that allows you to run models locally. And so if you look at the drop down here, these are all models that I have downloaded locally. And they range from a couple gigabytes to some very large models, like I have a DeepSeek R1 32-bit quantized model. Now, what does this mean? You've got this model. In a perfect world, it has not been distilled. And when it's not distilled, it's going to be very large. And so to use it at an effective pace and get a good answer, it needs to fit in RAM, preferably VRAM, okay? So what happens is, the full one for DeepSeek, last time I checked, was 671 gigs is what it required, something like that, or 671 billion parameters. The bottom line is it's more than I have on my laptop. It's more than most people have at home. So what these really smart nerds do is they do this quantization thing where they basically compress it. It's kind of like doing zip compression. The problem is it is lossy. You lose some precision in its ability to answer. But what you're able to do is get a general purpose one that's good, or you can say, you know what, I want to focus and create one that's optimized for just code. So I'm not going to be able to help you make Eggs Benedict. I'm not going to help you, figure out why your dog's eyes are glossy gray. but I will help you write Python and JavaScript and C Sharp. Okay? So there's these games they play. And so what you see here is Llama lets me host it locally because, oh, Cloudflare's down, and that means you can't get to ChatGPT, can't get to Anthropic. So then I'm going to come over here, and you'll notice I got a bunch of different models, but one of them is GPT OSS 120 billion parameter. So this is a fairly large model that I can ask questions. Now, the UI I'm using here is the canonical chat interface where I'm going to type a question and ask it. But before we do that, I'm going to come over here and we're going to make sure I have Activity Monitor running. There it is. And we want the other window. There's one called the GPU history. So there's my GPU. This is an M3 Max that has 128 gigs of shared memory, which means I should be able to load this model all the way in memory because I'm not running any VMs, I'm not running any heavy Docker containers or anything else. So we're going to come back to this. I'm going to go to this UI. This is called Bolt AI. It's just a GUI that lets you talk to different models. And I'm going to ask a question. In fact, you, sir, right there, third row back, you've been paying attention, nodding your head. Give me a question. And by the way, sir, have we rehearsed this? The smack starts. What is with you people? Yesterday we did a survey. One person picked all of the snarky answers. They know more about C# than Mads and Dustin. They could teach Scott Gu a thing about Azure. They knew it all. Never mind. You, sir, do you have a question I can ask? Okay. I'm going to put a little tip on this. Where do babies get my belly? Babies come from. Please give me a safe for work answer. No images. Okay, so this is, you notice it says it's thinking. Now, the very first time it's going to be a little slow because watch what's going to happen over here. On your left side, the GPU is going to start firing up as it loads the model into memory. Okay, safe for work. A baby begins when a tiny cell from a mother, called an egg, joins with a tiny cell from a father, called a sperm. When these two cells meet, they combine. This looks pretty good, and it feels fairly safe for work. Okay, that was reasonable. Now let's go back to Activity Monitor. And there you go. See those giant spikes? Those spikes was it loading into memory and answering the question. Okay? And that's what's happening all day long when people are using the various things. So now, if we go back to the whole point about talking about this is that process of using the model to basically do a one-shot. I have a question, I ask it, I get an answer back. Where we get into this idea of reasoning of thought is to say, I'm going to give you multiple questions at once, and I want you to figure out the best way to answer it, which may involve pulling additional data from other systems. One way you hear about this is what's called the RAG pattern, Retrieval Augmented Generation. And the idea is that we create a pipeline where a request comes in, you ask a question, and it goes through, and it looks in different parts of the system to supplement the baseline data. What we all should know by now is with these models represent a finite point in time based upon the data they were trained on. Which means one of the things that when ChatGPT first came out, if you asked it about who won Monday Night Football last night, it would go, I don't know, because my training cutoff date was a year ago, 6 months ago. All of the modern systems now support, and now that it's just kind of built in, you don't even have to tell it. Some you can actually say not to. It'll search the web. It'll basically do real-time indexing and looking to find out, you've asked me a question that is temporally based and that is going to be after my core training date. Therefore, I will search the internet and augment the response. And so it's these types of patterns that we have to get into. Now, why is this important? The reason this becomes important when you start thinking about building AI into your applications is that you're not just going to simply be able to say, hey, boss, Give me an API key, I'll have AI enabled in a day. That demos well, but it falls down when the miniature boss comes back and says, but you know what would be great? Is if we could just ask questions about our data. And there's the secret to all this AI stuff. You want to be successful with building AI systems, you have to become a data engineer. Data is the key to everything. Now, some of the companies on the internet who've been doing this for 20 years, like Meta as an example, they've known this, right? They didn't know it the way we're doing it today, but they knew data was the key. I'm working with a customer right now. We built an agent for them. And the goal was to just start with letting people ask questions about their software. Their software package is a very complex accounting style inventory application for the heavy trucking industry. And in doing so, this software they've written has been in use for over 20 years. It's very complex because it supports all sorts of things. It's awesome. But if you walk up and try to learn it, I'm a guy helping with the code, and I don't know how to use it. I mean, it is complex. So they wanted the ability to type in answers. So great, we started doing it. And I go, okay, well, where's your data? Well, we've got some data here. It's okay, let's see how it works. Not so well. It turned out that, sometimes we got good answers. Most of the times, not so much. And that's the key, right? If your data is garbage, you're going to get garbage out of your AI, okay? When we start thinking about multi-model integration, this is what we're talking about, is the ability to mix and match things based upon our needs. For developers, code plus text integration is one of our most powerful things. On the other hand, one of the things that's happened with products like Copilot is they're multi-model in that I can actually say, hey, here's a screenshot, help me figure this out. So I was working for another customer 2 weeks ago, and they wanted an update through the web application. And for that web application, we used Developer Express. So how do we make this better? Well, let me demonstrate. I'm not going to show you the actual stuff, but I will show you what it looks like when you go to Visual Studio Code. I was in Visual Studio Code, and it was something like this. And I came over to the chat window. And in using the chat window, two things were done. Number one is I chose the appropriate mode. So with Visual Studio Code, as of last Thursday, this is the non-insiders build. By the way, if you want to be on the bleeding edge, which I told you earlier you don't want to be, but if you do, use the insider build. Updates just about every day during the week. You now have 4 choices when you chat with Copilot. You can do the traditional ask. That is where I just ask it a question, it gives me an answer. It's up to me to do something about it. Then they have this thing called edit mode, where it will do edits with you. It'll offer to change a file, you'll tell it, you'll do it, and you'll go through. But you don't have to do all the typing. Then there's the new plan mode, which says, before we do anything, let's have a conversation, but I want you to do some reasoning. I want you to actually execute a thought pattern. And then finally, we have agent mode, which says, I'm going to tell you what I want done, you go and do it. And that can include modifying multiple files, doing things, as well as getting help from external services. Now you'll see I have this little tool icon here, and it's got a little warning. And the first thing it says is more than 128 tools are enabled. So first of all, what are these tools? Well, this year we saw a big push into what's called Model Context Protocol, which is a codification of an API interface for agents. In other words, it allows you to take what we'd often just consider an API interface, maybe a REST-based interface, but tweak it so it's optimized for non-human interaction. In other words, it's optimized for agents to talk to it. The most simplest type of MCP server is one that serves up developer-style or agent-style documentation on how to do things with a piece of technology. So going back to this example for the customer I'm working with, we use Dev Express as control. Specifically in this case for the web app, they're Dev Extreme stuff. Really good stuff, very powerful. Supports all sorts of JavaScript frameworks. Supports my favorite though, ASP.NET, C#. And so I want Copilot to have that extra bit of knowledge. So what you're able to do is you can come over into your extensions. And then if you'll look inside Visual Studio Code, there's these MCP servers. Now you'll notice I have a few configured already. I have the Microsoft Learn one. That's a more equivalent to the DevExpress one. It will give you help and information about Microsoft tools and technologies via Microsoft Learn, which is Microsoft's documentation site. Okay? Yeah, the videos, all the stuff. This basically gives your Copilot superpowers around that bit of technology. The difference was I picked DevExpress. Okay? And so you'll see that I can come over here and I can see what's installed, but I can also search. And when I do that, I can say, hey, let's enable the MCP servers. And it's going to search. I'm still on the internet, and there you go. And so you'll see that there's some third-party ones. There's the official GitHub one. Going a little further, there's one from Notion. There's Stripe. So Stripe's good, right? Stripe does online payments. So let's say you need to enable payments. You could add the Stripe MCP server, and then what you do is you come over. I'm not going to install it because I have no idea what it's going to do, but let's pretend I did. Then you would come over here, and you click this, and you would basically say which tools you care about. Now you'll notice it says 174 tools are enabled. So what that means is I've said, hey, I want all the knowledge. Well, what happens when you tell someone to do something and check all the sources? It's going to take a lot longer, right? And in the case of computers, it takes longer, it does more processing, your fan's going to spin up, and it's going to go slower. So don't do it unless you need it. So what they're telling me is that we really think 128 is the optimal number. Why? There's probably something that a developer did and wrote, no one's going to want more than 128. So you can control the tools you want, and then you can scroll down this list, and you'll see that, oh, these all have decided, well, right now, I'm not using Mermaid. I'm not using Jupyter. I don't need it for these. I want the Docs one. I don't need GitKraken. I like GitHub. I don't need DeepWiki. And now, I'm still at 142. Wow, oh wait, do I have more up here that I missed? Oh yeah, I've got all these built-in ones. Okay, I'll just say that's okay. So you click OK, and even though it's got the triangle, I can now still ask a question, and I can say something like, how do I implement payment processing in this website? Now imagine I did the Stripe one, okay? So I'm going to do this, and I'm just going to click Send. And it's going to go through, and notice it's activating MCP servers. And notice it even gave me an option to skip. And now it's going through and looking at the tool selection based upon the question I asked, and it's going to realize this guy doesn't want to know anything about pull requests, so I can dump that tool. I don't need that. And this is one of those things, right? If you can make some advanced decisions on what you're doing, it'll go faster. And now it says, look at what it did. Oh, hold on, it's stealth. So it's thinking, right? This is giving me its thought reasoning. What you may have missed because it went by a little fast is it said you might want to consider Stripe. Okay? So I could add the Stripe thing, and I could say, how do I use your API from C#? And what it could do is take the Stripe MCP server and the Microsoft Learn MCP server, and it would bring that together and use the backend LLM. In this case, I'm using ChatGPT's 5.1 frontier model. And there you go. Oh my goodness, look at that. It even said, here's a sample with Stripe. So it went through and did all that processing, okay? Now, this is part one. The next part was I had to do some stuff with DevExpress, and it didn't work right. Now, I could have said these columns were not set up the way I wanted them in the grid. You know what I did instead? I took a screenshot. You can take a screenshot and paste it in. So let's do this. I've just decided I'm going to go YOLO. I'm going off-road here. Mickey, probably don't let me do that during the keynote. Now, you might be wondering, what is Moom? Moom is a third-party tool that gives me these great features on Mac OS to scale my windows. They have a new version, and this new version costs money for me to upgrade. So let's go upgrade, okay? So let's come over here. Let's go to the app. Let's go over here. Let's go to Buy Now. Perfect. I'm now going to create a screenshot. I'm going to copy that screenshot. It's now on my clipboard. I'm going to go back over to Visual Studio Code. Let's start with the UI. Please build an MVC view that looks like this screenshot. And what you may be hard to see, so let me zoom in. There's the pasted image. Now I've chosen ChatGPT 5, but based upon my Copilot plan, I might have lots of choices. I happen to be on an enterprise plan and I've enabled them all. And by the way, if your list doesn't look like this and you know you're giving GitHub a lot of money, if you're the administrator, it's your fault. If you're not the administrator, go find your administrator. As they introduce these new frontier models, you have to turn them on and say you want them accessible to your Copilot users. So I'm just going to use 5. I'm just going to say, do it. Now you notice there's this other button right here. I could actually do that same thing, but do it up in the cloud. And it would actually run on GitHub's hardware, etc. So we have lots of choices. So there it goes. I'm going to let it run. We'll see what it does. Whoops, that's not what I want. Go. We're not going to search my Mac. So it's telling me what it's doing, it's thinking, and doing that. So let's go back and let me catch up on a couple slides, and we'll come back and check on what it's doing. Okay, so it created it to do. I'm just waiting to see if it's going to ask anything. It's reading the book service, book controller. So the website I have here is what is a simple bookstore. So it's doing its work figuring out how the app works. It's going to go do that. Okay, so the last thing is cross-model reasoning. Today, we're not completely there, but we're getting there. And you're going to be able to do this very soon with GitHub Copilot and something that is part of what is now called Agent HQ in GitHub. So today, most of the time when you work with a particular model through a service, for that conversation, you're using one model and one back-end reasoning pipeline. What is changing is this ability to have one pipeline, which is actually managed by the provider through an agent, and it can then, in turn, use sub-agents, which means I can have, for example, Anthropic's Claude Haiku 4.5 be my core. I want you to update this feature. But when it comes to UI, I'd like you to actually use Gemini to do that. And then I want you to use Codex, which is from OpenAI, to validate things. Today, I do that manually. And I'll show this tomorrow in that I can write some code with Claude, but then I will take the code it's written, and I'll be on a branch, and I'll go over and give it to Codex, and I'll say, look for issues here. And of course, then when I put it up into a pull request in GitHub, I have GitHub Advanced Security to look for issues as well. By the way, in doing this, true story, Codex didn't find any issues, but GitHub Advanced Security did. So sometimes you want to use more than one. And the idea is that you'll be able to do this through just command sequences and configuration. You won't have to do it manually. This means we start thinking about all the implications on what we do on a day-to-day basis. The goal is not to replace you, it's to remove that drudgery. And so we have everything from code generation all the way through to system design, documentation, and of course, testing. And so you start thinking about it, we got these different bits and bobs that we're going to use. You've probably seen most of these tools. And this ends up with this ecosystem that's going to have different pieces of AI sprinkled around it. And that's the thing to keep in mind. If it's not there today, it'll probably be there tomorrow. With GitHub Copilot, I'm a huge fan. Yes, I used to work at GitHub, and yes, disclaimer, I am a Microsoft stockholder as a former employee, but I still think Copilot is an incredibly compelling piece of technology, particularly because as the home of open source and as the home of over 180 million developers, it is where software gets built. And what that means is they have everything from the chutzpah to the relationships to bring things together. One of the big announcements at GitHub Universe 2 weeks ago was the fact that they have this notion of Agent HQ, and that you'll be able to use these other frontier models, not just in a chat situation, but in an agent perspective. So let's go back over to Visual Studio Code, and it says it did something. Wow, let's go look. It's saying it added some files. So it added a new controller for me, a view model, and it did a bunch of HTML. What's the chances this actually, I can look at this? You guys want to try? I like going off-road. Okay, so I'm going to tell it to keep it. And then I'm going to come over here to the Solution Explorer. And I'm going to right click and I'm going to tell it to build. So let's make sure it compiles. Let's make this a little smaller. Wow, 0 warnings, 0 errors. Shoot. Shall we debug? Why not? Sure, I trust it. Okay, and it called the controller uh, payment controller checkout view. Let's see where it put the views in my. So it's payment checkout. Holy shnikes. Is that cool? That is amazing. That is the power of a multimodal AI system. I gave it a picture and a basic instruction, and it went through and built me something that looks quite reasonable. Now, I'm not an HTML expert, but that's good enough for me to give it to an HTML expert. It's a great way of prototyping. It's a great way to get things going and then get an expert human to work with it. Now, I want to show you this other feature. So in the newest release, you have access to what's called agent sessions in Visual Studio Code, assuming you're using GitHub Copilot, which is also available in the UI by coming over here to Copilot. And this is part of what we call Agent HQ. And you can come over here to your agents, and this is where you can come in and create tasks and delegate. But I can also do it from Visual Studio Code, and you'll be able to do this in Visual Studio 2026 soon. So you'll notice that there's local chats, GitHub Copilot agent, the CLI agent, but then take a look at this puppy dog right here. OpenAI Codex. What GitHub has done is they've partnered, starting with OpenAI first, and it's coming with Anthropic and other major players soon, is you'll be able to use their backend coding agent, which is independent of the way Copilot uses. Copilot is the agent that then can talk to ChatGPT, can talk to Claude. But then these vendors also have their own agents that they've built some smarts into. I'm a huge fan of Claude Code. It works really well with the command line. Pretty soon, I'll have an option here to delegate some work on my project to Claude Code. But here's the best part. I don't have to pay Anthropic directly. It comes out of my budget that I have as a Copilot subscriber. You don't have to go sign up for a new account. You don't have to set up any billing agreement. It's just going to work. So I can come over here and I can say, hey, I want to use Codex. And notice, that's it. I didn't have to log in, don't have anything. I didn't do this before. I literally just did this as the first time on this machine. I clicked it, and there we go. I can go and say, please implement multi-user authentication via intra. Now, I'm not going to hit this because then that's it. All my money's gone because it'll take it forever. But in all due seriousness, you can do a task just like you do with Copilot, but now it's using Codex. And now I'm going to bring it back to Reddit. You go on Reddit, people have strong opinions on what works best for them. The fact that Claude Code works good for me when I'm writing C#, T-SQL, and building my first ever Chrome extension, and I've not written one line of JavaScript, I'm just vibe coding it because one must. It works for me. You may find that one of the other tools works better for you. You might find that just native Copilot works best. Now you can pick and choose and work on it on a project-by-project basis without rattling your brain and setting up 15 different accounts and convincing your boss, oh, you're going to see 15 new credit card payments come by every month as we go through this. So this is one of the powerful things that's come out of this partnership and everything else that's going on. All right. So there's lots of other coding assistants. I'm going to talk more about this tomorrow in my session on IDEs. The bottom line is you have choice. You have choice. Your partners have choice. There's lots of things you can do. And again, you can even do what I did here and I'm going to go back to one more time. I forgot I had one more thing to show you in Visual Studio Code. We had trouble today where the frontier models like Claude and ChatGPT weren't available, which meant if you were in Visual Studio Code and you went into your agent and you picked one of these models, you were going to get stuck really quick. Okay, but I have a llama. Manage chat language. Let me use a llama. Oh, cool. How about I just use the Quencoder 30B? And there you go. I can now use Copilot locally, and instead of going to the cloud, it's going to run locally on my machine. It works when the internet's not, well, let me slow down. It works when Cloudflare's down, and it means my entire question stays locally in a model I control. So if you're in certain secure or restricted environments, that also may be an option. Now, for Copilot to work, let's be very clear, Copilot still has to talk to the internet because of the way their pipeline works. If you don't want that, if I come over here and go to my profiles, you'll see I have this Ollama with C# option. Okay, sure. I'm doing a demo. I'm willing to risk it. If I come over here to my extensions, get rid of the MCP. Whoa, that's not what I wanted, folks. I want to go back to my extensions. Thank you, clear. And if you look at installed, you'll see I've got Copilot turned off, but I have something called Continue. Continue is an open source extension that when you put it into VS Code and connect it to a Llama, means the whole thing takes place on your machine. So it works in airplane mode, for example. Okay? So you have lots of options on how you do this. All right. I'm down to, it looks about 13 minutes. Good. We're doing good. So again, lots of choices out there in the cloud. And again, you can go local. So just like we have this different breakdown in different models, we have different sets of APIs. We have the foundation APIs, which means, yes, you literally can build your own ChatGPT client that you ask questions and go through. That's what Bolt AI does. They went and built this UI, and then they use all the public interfaces, and you provide your key, and they let you switch between them. Okay? Then you have these specialized APIs that are a step below, which is I only want to generate images. For example, I was playing with Google Cloud. They have their image engine available, so I thought, how hard is it to ask it to generate images? It's not that hard, it turns out. But that's a model that when you ask it questions, it's only going to let you deal with building images, right? This is a subset of what you can find often through a foundation model, but it might be more efficient, provide a richer API surface, and also be faster. And then, of course, you have these application platforms, which you're starting to see show up in the realm of, say, for example, Power Apps, which is enabling what we call the citizen developer. Not necessarily vibe coding, but the ability to use the power of AI to solve some of the problems that we traditionally had to hand off to developers that we can get done, and so you can focus on the harder problems. Now, when you start thinking about AI-enabled applications, first thing you have to do is start thinking about what is your AI integration story going to be? Are you going to rely upon a foundation model? Are you going to use a more specially trained model? Are you going to provide access to data beyond your data? Or are you going to restrict it? Are you going to implement some responsible AI pattern? Are you going to check things to make sure they're safe for work? Those are all things that go into that planning stage. You got to figure out the type of pattern you're going to build, and this is the thing. There are established patterns that work well. The code I worked with my customer to build on was using technology like Azure AI Search, which used to be part of the cognitive services family. We picked that because it was a known quantity. We knew what it cost us per month to get started. We knew it worked well, and it was established. It's not the latest and greatest, sexiest embedded database, but it works. And sometimes that's the better solution than, oh, we're going to use the latest model. And in fact, we've had no problems using an older GPT model. It's all been about the data, right? So select how you're going to do that. We're using it as a standard RAG pattern. We're not even using any of the more fancier types of implementations. Think about what your user experience is going to be. Is that chat experience that we all know and I'm not going to say loathe, but use, is that what you want? Do you need to support voice to text? Do you need to support the ability to paste images in? Right? Any system that does anything with like say PDFs, receipts, accounting, people are going to want to be able to submit images, whether it be in the form of a picture, etc. You have to think about those in advance and how are you going to implement the UI. This is what's great about some of the third parties. And again, I'm a huge DevExpress fan. And by the way, I pay for it myself every year for my consulting. I do not get a free copy. They have introduced some AI-enabled features in their code. And what's great is you bring your own model. They don't tell you to use a model, but they let you do things like, oh, help me validate this text. Help me do address recognition. Help me do image recognition. And then finally, implement those safeguards. The reality is that if you don't do it, one of two things happens. You get garbage in, garbage out experiences, or bad things happen to your system because someone, whether on purpose or not, does something bad when they use the application. And so you go across this, you have everything from embedded models, which again is one of the ways that you commonly implement RAG, where you basically take your data, convert the data into what are called vectors. Those vectors are used as a way to do cosine analysis in a typical RAG pattern, where you try and figure out is the data that you're looking for similar or more similar or less similar to the data being requested. Again, hooking in your APIs and this hybrid approach are what we typically do. Here's just a quick example because if I don't have code on the slides, I'm not a real PowerPoint user. And this is also, by the way, is how do you know if it's AI or not? If it's code in a PowerPoint, it's artificial intelligence. Never mind, I'm just making fun. Anyway, accessing APIs. This is a real example using C#. So you notice it's using the HTTP client. It's doing a standard request header, packages up some data, and you'll notice right here on the slide, there's this system and user bit. System sets the kind of core parameters on what you're supposed to do. You're a helpful agent who's designed to help with questions about shipping receipts. That's it. And then there's the user where you actually feed their question. And this allows you to do turns and do things as well as analyze as you go back and forth. Temperature lets you control how creative you want to be in the response or how static. Creativity, if you don't allow it to be a little creative, you get back very robot-sounding text. You also can get stuff that's known as very boring. When we're doing creative writing, we often take the temperature, increase the temperature so that it's more, flexible, flowery, right? And that's because we're doing statistical probability. The most logical next token might be the more boring one as opposed to what we want. And you go through to get a response and you can spit this out. Now, definitely when looking at how you write things is finding the right balance. Now, one of the things that I do a lot that Eric Boyd, Eric, are you in the room? You sometimes hide. So Eric is one of our presenters here. Eric is really smart. He's been doing AI for a long time. He's the kind of guy who reads the Vishwani et al. Paper or the paper that was written by the math guy, Wolfram Alpha, him, the head Wolfram Alpha guy. And it's got all the math and stuff on how this stuff works. And Eric likes it for bedtime reading. For me, it puts me to sleep. Eric is happy. I like to be polite to the AI because I've seen too many versions of the Terminator movies. Okay, I've seen them all multiple times. So I want to be polite to the AI. So I often will say, please, thank you. Eric says, that's a waste of your tokens. Just tell it to do it. Okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be nice. That's what my mother taught me. But the key with a good prompt is providing the right level of data. This affects what we call the context as you go through and work with the AI and how it creates its answer. Too much data can overload the context and means you get back an answer that is completely off-road. Too little can mean you get an incomplete answer. So there is an art to this notion of what we call prompt engineering, where we sit down and we think about how we write our questions and deal with the answers. For AI applications, definitely look at graceful fallback, right? Bad things will happen. Cloudflare will not be available. What does your app do? Monitoring your performance. There's two pieces here. There's all the standard AI application, or sorry, all the application monitoring you have to do, from availability to compute, disk space, etc. But with AI applications, there tends to be this overriding factor that people forget about when they're not the one paying the bill, is that every token costs you money at some point. And so you start seeing things. For example, one of the new discussions out there is, rather than using JSON, use some other type of messaging format. Tune is a new one that's coming out. I have no experience with it, but the idea is that it's less verbose. If it uses less bytes, it ends up using less tokens as far as the input. And if you tell it, I want tune back instead of JSON, again, that can reduce the amount of data coming out. That affects cost, but then there's also how much performance are you willing to pay. When you use a cloud hoster like Microsoft, one of the things you do is you say, here's how many requests per second I want to be able to handle. Here's how many millions of tokens I want to be able to use. The more you ask for, the more they're going to charge you. But again, if you don't pay for enough, your users are going to get a poor response. And then there's the thing to understand that you have to continuously improve, right? You have to embrace that notion of Kaizen that we often talk about, which is continuously learning and improving the system. And then finally, yes, you have to look at content filtering. We've gotten to this point where we're running into the world of AI agents and agentic workflows. Again, at University, they announced some really good stuff. This is still very much in the nascent stages. Microsoft's going to announce some stuff this week. I guarantee it. I don't know what it is. I don't work for the man anymore directly. But the bottom line is, there will be announcements in this space. A year from now, we should be able to have built some really good stuff in 2026. But right now, this is hot. This is stuff that, you want to build your own MCP server? Oh, I hope you're willing to update the SDK just about every other day, because that's how often it's changing when you're using the C# MCP SDK. There's all these different things we're doing, and memory systems is a hot topic, right? If I go to my phone and I bring up ChatGPT, I've enabled memory. So when I talk to the ChatGPT agent, who I've given a name, Samantha, and in talking to Samantha, she knows if I start talking about my dog, that my dog's name is Shadow, that he's a 12-year-old Shih Tzu, and he's got a bit of glaucoma. There's memory. And so this means giving memory to your application, and that's different from history. History is that more traditional thing. You say, well, you have this conversation. Memory is so that the agent or the agentic system can bring in that past context to guide what it does next. When I use Claude, because I use it a lot, it knows that when I'm asking questions about something for a presentation, that I like to show more than I like to talk in most cases. This is kind of a heavy talky talk, but you get it. And then we start going from tools to agents. And the biggest difference between the two is that agents can have autonomy to do things. Vicki and I are going to talk about that in the keynote on whether you always want to do that. But again, human in the loop is still important. There's lots of components. And you'll notice we got foundational models, memory, tool, planning, and execution. Agent orchestration, standard loop, very much like when we do things as humans. We want the agents to think before they do it, act, look at it, reason, and definitely check their work. I've already talked about running locally with Ollama. This gives you a lot of benefits. Control and privacy. In theory, cost efficiency, but you got to pay for the hardware. Can you afford the hardware? And even if you can afford it, can you get any of it, right? For those of you that are gamers, right, we've went through some runs with the 3090s, the 4090s, and now the 5090s that even if you have the money, can you get your hands on one? Well, it's even worse when you start saying, oh, I'd like a cluster of H1000s because I want to run my own local LLMs. Offline operations, really good about it, and customization, but again, know what you're getting into. Local AI tools, Ollama and LLM Studio are great. Ollama is more of the back end, and then you end up with tools like Bolt that I show, or you can use, over here in my browser, Open Web UI. Look at this. This is a web-based interface that runs in a Docker container. You don't have to run in Docker, but it's the easiest way. That's going to talk to Ollama. And it's going to provide me with my history and my conversation. For example, tell me about the 1970 pros and cons of hitchhiking, which was a fun one. There's also an album by Roger Waters from Pink Floyd. But in either case, it went through and gave me these answers, right? And I'm able to go through and look at my history just like I would with a paid product, except it's all local. My data's all local. It's there in my system, etc. Hardware, you guys can look at the slides. Slides will be available on the conference website probably by tomorrow. Model repositories, I already talked about Hugging Face. GitHub is another one. GitHub is at GitHub Models. It's a great way to try a lot of the frontier models for free. Okay, you should check that out. There's also what's called Model Scope. Lots of learning resources. Keeping up. Yeah, good luck. Last thing, ethical considerations and best practices. Think about privacy. Understand that LLMs are only as good as the data they're trained on, and therefore they're going to have biases. Unfortunately, we've seen some really bad implementations of this stuff. Google had some bad stuff with their image generation at one point. Every AI vendor has had some major issues with this. And so you really need to think about this, particularly if you're going to do anything that is consumer facing. If you're doing anything consumer facing, you're going to have to work twice as hard, if not 3 times as hard, versus an internal application. That said, if you're a global company with an internal application, you're going to have to pay attention to regulations as well as compliance, whether if you're in the medical industry, for example, HIPAA. Obviously, if you're in the financial sector, there's all things related to Sarbanes-Oxley, et cetera. You have to think about those things. Make sure you're transparent and that you implement security. Lots of AI ethics. You can read the slides later. Responsible AI development. Oh my goodness, there's a lot going on. AI is going to transform the way you build stuff and the way you use stuff. Just understand, and this will be a theme in the keynote, it doesn't do anything without you. And so make sure that gets translated not only to your peers and your team, but up the chain to management. And if you're a pointy-haired boss in the room, right, just because you're using AI doesn't mean you get to replace people, okay? You're going to regret it just like people regretted offshoring a lot of their software development. Key takeaways, resources, contact information, that's me. Hey, folks, thank you for coming to this talk. Thank you for coming to Visual Studio Live and the larger Live 360 show. My name is Brian Randell. I'll be here all week, and I have a keynote in about a half hour. So be good humans. Have a great rest of your week. Talk to you soon.